Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Sledgehammer has recently detailed some very important stats in game and got a little bit more in depth in some specific features within Modern Warfare 3 and Warzone that you absolutely need to be paying attention to. They are severely impacting your general loadouts, your meta setups, all your best weapons, and it's things that could cost you gunfights pretty much every single time if you're not paying attention to the right things. So initially, this information stems from Sledgehammer's Twitter. They've been doing an awesome job communicating. Just last week, they were posting about some patch notes, updating various aftermarket parts, and in which one of the updates was for the Bloom, the ADS spread on the AMR9 Jack Etten double barrel kit, whatever it's called, right? It had Bloom. The bullets were not going where you were aiming, so they clarified a little bit more on this being the actual Bloom system. And then shout out my boy Carnage XVI16, fellow Carnage member, asked them about this, saying, hey, can you explain the differences between aiming idle sway and aiming stability? Additionally, do these have any effect while firing? And this is what Sledgehammer had to say about it. Firing aiming stability controls the bounciness/shakiness of the weapon while firing. You can think of this as micro movements introducing deviation to the weapon's recoil pattern. So this is not a brand new system to COD. It's been a thing for a bit. It was especially noticeable, however, last year in Modern Warfare 2. It was a huge problem, basically, that took away the predictiveness and the repetitiveness of a weapon's behavior. So when you would go to shoot, let's say, for instance, a Kastov 7.62, its general recoil pattern might be a little bit up and then a tad bit to the right. But because of the firing aim stability and this bounciness and the shakiness, while it's going a tad bit up and to the right, it could start to zig and zag randomly throughout the pattern as it's going up and to the right. And sometimes it might hang on the right a couple of extra shots. Sometimes it might hang the left a couple of extra shots. It might bounce a little bit more between your shots, and it makes an inconsistent gunfight, basically. It creates a situation where you could spend hours and hours and hours learning a weapon's recoil pattern. It doesn't take that long. It takes like 5 minutes in the firing range. But for example, you could spend all this time learning a weapon's recoil pattern, mastering it, memorizing it, getting the muscle memory down, but you'd still have RNG there that could randomly cause you to lose a fight. Now, while it was amplified in Modern Warfare 2, and that to a certain extent does still exist pretty heavily on a lot of MW2 weapons currently within MW3 and Warzone, it does also exist on MW3 weapons as well. Just across the board, there's less shakiness and bounciness on MW3 guns. They're a little bit easier to use, but it does still exist and creates that RNG and inconsistent effect. They then go on to say aiming idle sway is a constant subtle motion that begins once the player aims down sights. Now, I do wish they were a little bit more specific here. Aiming idle sway would, indicate that it's just there when you're idle, when you're simply aiming down sights. They don't specify if this is something that continues once you start shooting, right? But it's still going to be there, and this obviously is the very straightforward sway when you're going, left to right, down, up, as you're aiming down sights. It's what's causing your weapon to move and feel alive in a sense. It's not just you aim and you're constantly pointed dead on the exact same spot until you start shooting, right? So both of these are incredibly important aspects in a gunfight. And it's also something that creates a huge advantage in game for certain players. 16 always goes, super in depth on like detailed stats and all sorts of stuff like that. And says, this is the answer I feared. It appears idle sway is still active when firing. Again, that's just because they didn't really specify, which is just RNG. And controller players can, for the most part, ignore this because aim assist will make this a little bit easier in general. Now, aim assist doesn't directly affect the actual recoil pattern itself. If a weapon goes up and to the right, even with aim assist, it's still going to shoot up and to the right, but it does make the random bounciness and shake less obnoxious. Keyboard and mouse players, without that aim assist, it becomes a lot more dependent on you correcting for that RNG on the fly, which makes your life a whole lot more difficult for no real reason. It also creates attachment conundrums, which I want to talk a lot more about because many attachments that are helping firing aim stability do make your idle sway worse. So it is, a trade-off there that is helping you in one aspect, but still hurting you overall. So let's jump into game and be a little bit more specific with what you got to look out for here. By the way, as we go a little bit more in depth here in the Gunsmith, if you guys are new to the channel, every single day I got you covered with news, updates, meta breakdowns, patch notes. It's all right here. So if you want to guarantee you are always up to date, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. And if you enjoyed this video, or if you simply find it helpful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. It is always really appreciated. So we're here on a general meta loadout, and you can see I've got several different attachments set up. This is pretty standard for like an SVA, just for example here. And for instance, on my barrel, you'll see that one of the pros is that aiming idle sway. It's being increased along with range, velocity, and general control, while the ADS speed is being hurt, so is the tack stand spread and the strafe speed. Now, here's another issue outright, is that while you are seeing these pros and cons, and as we've discussed for the most part, they are relatively reliable. Certain one-off instances, things can be a little bit wonky, but for the most part, you can believe what it's saying it's doing. You'll notice that while we go into the advanced stats here, and I go ahead and hide my face cam just so you guys can see everything, yes, clearly we are getting the benefits to the range, the velocity, and the control as mentioned. We're seeing the hindrances or the cons for the strafe speed, the hip fire speed, the ADS speed, and the sprint to fire. What you're not seeing any mention of here, though, is the firing aim stability or the aiming idle sway. There is no graph here that represents that sway, which is a seriously lacking part of the advanced stats. Now, who knows if that's going to be updated in the future? If it is, awesome. If it's not, it's just something that's going to continue to confuse players who are not watching videos like this. So this is, pretty vital information to know. But for instance, this precision barrel on the SVA is one of these that's going to help out with your aiming idle sway, and that's a huge deal because it's going to make this SVA a lot more predictable and accurate. And if someone's using an SVA, but say they're not using this barrel, but they're using a laser instead, you're probably going to end up winning that fight if you're landing the same shots, because yours are going to be a bit more accurate and less random. They could miss a stray left or a stray right here and there, and that costs the fight right then and there, straight up. You guys know that we oftentimes spam underbarrels, like for instance the Bruin heavy support. This is something that I'm using across the board on a lot of weapons because objectively this is one of the best things in the game. You'll notice it helps out with your horizontal control and your gun kick control, which is obviously expressed in the general advanced stats. 12% to horizontal, although this does vary a little bit between weapon to weapon, but it's always focusing heavy on horizontal, a little bit on gun kick, hurting your vertical control, hurts your ADS speed a little bit just behind the face cam. But the two other pros on here, giving you better aiming idle sway and better firing aim stability. So this is something you could throw on an MW3 gun and it instantaneously becomes way more efficient, way more accurate, and especially on MW2 guns, because underbarrels are universal, you could use this on those and significantly reduce that as well. Unfortunately, again, there's no mention of this on the advanced stats. So someone could look at this and say, okay, it's hurting my vertical control, I don't want that, but that's not even a huge deal. This is helping you so much more than it's doing anything negative to your gun that it's an obvious choice for something you want to be using just across the board to make your weapon significantly better. But then you can't just say, okay, I'm going to look at these stats, I'm going to look at the aiming idle sway pro, and anything that has that, I'm going to go for it, because let's go to the rear grips. This is something that you'll see on a ton of weapons. Things like the Demo 650 rear grip, plus firing aim stability, plus gun kick control, minus aiming idle sway. So this helps out with the bounciness and the shakiness, but that weapon sway just became a lot worse, which, as Sledge alluded to, it starts when you aim down your sights, and then that becomes a problem. That becomes something that's going to make you a lot less accurate over time. But if you were to look at the advanced stats here, you'd go in and say, okay, hey, I want to use this rear grip. There's no negatives here. There's no cons. Unfortunately, it not being translated results in this. Now, that said, this in specific with the aiming idle sway in a weapon like this is really relevant for mid to long range fights. You'll notice that on a lot of my different SMG builds that we've covered in my top 10s and whatnot, or different meta breakdowns, I'll use grips like this on, SMGs that might need an extra bit of control, because only hurting idle sway when you're fighting at, 5 to 10 meters where player models are much larger, those random, elements of the recoil pattern, that sway is not going to be a huge deal when your target is that much larger. It's going to be easy to hit center mass, and your aim's not going to be deviating beyond their shoulders or beyond their hips or something like that. But you get out to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 meters and beyond, the player models shrink. It's going to be a lot harder to precisely hit those if your weapon does have any bit of sway like that. So it's something you really have to watch for depending on the style of weapon you're building. It could completely help the setup and have very minimal effect, or it could drastically reduce your overall efficiency, especially if you end up stacking things that might end up hurting this. If you're using, a barrel that ends up hurting your aiming idle sway for whatever reason, which there are several of, like for instance, if you're going for a speed build here, even if you're using this in the mid range, it could, have have a negative impact on that. And if you were to stack this with something like a rear grip, okay, hey, I'm losing, you know, control here because I'm using this fast barrel. I'm going to go ahead and throw in this rear grip and regain the control. Well, now you're severely impacting idle sway, and it's going to cause you to lose more fights because of that outright. So it's nice that we've got the clarification on this from Sledge directly, but it's really something that now more than ever is being highlighted as one of, if not the most important aspect of a setup to make it meta and to make it consistent and reliable, so that regardless of what the TTK stats say, you're actually hitting your shots, because that's step one in having fast TTKs or efficient weapons to begin with. But that being said, that is going to wrap things up for this one. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, drop a like on it. And of course, if you're new here, you want to guarantee that every single day you are up to date with all things going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.